we should do a whole podcast sometime on on Alpenglow's clients. But one I wanted to shout out is John Colony. Like John has actually attempted Everest 3 times before with me, so this was his fourth attempt to summit Everest, and the 3 previous times were all seasons that were canceled for reasons not under his own control. In 2012, when Russ felt like the whole mountain was too dangerous. In 2014, during the earthquake. In 2015, during the ice fall avalanche that killed 19 Sherpa. And then he took a decade off to focus on other things with his family, and then came back this year. So imagine 4 tries on the mountain, 3 failures having nothing to do with his own ability, but just the universe, the cosmos saying Everest is fucking hard and you can't summit this year. I got to stand on top with him, and it was like just this incredible feeling of like, this is why I've dedicated my career and my life to this, is someone like John Colony, like putting that level of effort in over 15 years and accomplishing his goal. It's like, that's why we climb Everest. Hello and welcome to the Duffel Shuffle. I'm Adrian Ballinger, and we're here to discuss the world of climbing and skiing in all its forms through the eyes of mountain guides.
And I'm Sam Kiekefer. In each episode, we'll unpack exhilarating stories, share invaluable insights, and get up close and personal with some of the most experienced and passionate guides and athletes in the industry.
Whether you're a seasoned alpinist or a weekend warrior, the Duffel Shuffle is your ticket to the thrilling world of climbing, skiing, and mountaineering. Join us.
All right, Adrian, episode 5. Welcome home. How was your trip?
We're back. I mean, I guess I'm back. You're back too. We should talk about you.
Yeah, I'm actually
America's
leaving.
Newest ski guide.
I think there's quite a few.
Yeah, but what does that mean? I mean, when I got home, one of the first things I was excited about was like, oh my gosh, I get to congratulate Sam. What did you do while I was away walking up a big hill?
Yep, so I actually left just before you, went up to the North Cascades, and I took my final AMGA ski guide exam. I passed. All went well. We had some tough conditions, but in the end, feels good to have checked that box and continue working towards being a fully certified mountain guide like yourself.
Wow. Yeah. Congratulations. Was there ever a moment of this might not work out?
I think like going into it before the exam started, there's a lot of emotion around that. And, you're like, am I prepared? Am I not prepared? Should I have prepared more? But once things got rolling, I think, my anxiety is most on day one. And as the exam went, day by day, my confidence increased each day, which seems to be kind of how courses and exams go for me in general. So nice to, feel that way, I guess. It's better than getting more anxious each day. But no, I wouldn't say there was ever a moment where I was like, I don't think this is going well.
That's excellent. Well, congratulations. I know you were prepared, and, thanks for not sullying the Alpenglow Expeditions name by failing your exam. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a fun thing to talk about because we've talked when we were designing this podcast a little bit, kind of why you and I are co-hosts, but in some ways we're at different points in our career where I think I finished my certification way back in 2007, I think. And so I guess that makes me crusty and jaded now in my guiding career. And you, even though you've been guiding for quite a few years now, you're really at the beginning of that certification process and going from being, American style guide to a certified professional mountain guide. And getting through your first of 3 exams, it's a big step.
Yep, feels good. Checking a box. Now I'm going to go walk up Shasta today. You become a certified ski guide, and then you end up guiding more alpine.
Nice. So you're guiding this weekend.
Yep, I'm headed up to Shasta. I've got actually a private client who's off to Alpamayo later on in the summer, and she's kind of just doing a shakeout trip. She had some work in San Francisco, so we're going to go run up Shasta, probably climb some, lesser climbed routes on the Whitney side of the Whitney Glacier side of the mountain, and then maybe take a lap up Castle Ridge. So yeah, mix it up, do some fitness, climbing, just shake out climb.
So sick. Well, I my weekend looks slightly different. I obviously just got home, still jet lagged and a little confused about where I am and what I'm doing. But one of the wild things was one of my clients on Everest this year, actually climbing to the North Pole, not all the way to the summit, organizes musical acts for Stanford. He's the president of I can't remember the name of the group, and he's bringing this DJ called Fred again that I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with, kind of one of the breakthrough artists of the last year or two. And Fred again's coming in. When we were on the mountain, he was joking about if you get home by June 6th, you should come to this amazing concert and we'll have so much fun. I'm like, there's no way I'll be home by June 6th, and now I'm home on June 4th, and so I think the Alpenglow office has closed, and 15 of us are driving down to go see this show tonight at Stanford. It's going to be a little bit different. Culture shock as well as jet lag will be my challenges this evening.
Just like the olden days, I'm sure when you were younger guiding on Everest, you would come off the mountain and go right into the party world. And even with a 18-month-old, you're sticking to it. You're coming right off the mountain and heading down to the Bay Area for a good old DJ set.
There you go. It used to seem so easy to go straight into partying in, Thailand or Indonesia or Vietnam or wherever the guide crew went after the season. Now we're home and, like you said, with baby in tow, but I'll try to relive it.
Well, yeah, we'll dive more into your Everest season in a minute here later on in the episode. But as we normally do, want to kind of talk about news. It's been a while since we've chatted. We've kind of gotten off our regular cadence of episodes. Just turns out you being on one side of the planet and me being on the other makes things a little bit harder. Although we did get an episode out from Everest Base Camp.
We got one episode out. Everyone should go have a listen to it, I think, if only to hear my out of breath self try to speak knowledgeably about anything.
Everest Base Camp is a little higher than you're used to, although you've spent a lot of time there in your life.
Do we think it was the highest podcast recording ever? Should we go to Guinness?
Yeah, let's get one from the North Pole next year. But I do
Deal.
kind of want to dive into news. There's been quite a bit of news since we've last spoken, and we're not going to cover everything. But I think the biggest news is the New York Times article discussing sexual abuse and sexual harassment in the world of high altitude mountaineering. The title talks about the risks going beyond those of a normal mountain hazard, avalanches and rockfall and the likes. The article covers sexual abuse in the world of mountaineering and specifically calls out multiple incidents with a mountain guide by the name of Nims Purja. That obviously is kind of a really big news story in the world of mountaineering, and I think the New York Times posting it talks about its significance in the world as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a story that when it broke, it just kind of transformed, I think, my whole season, certainly, and probably most people's take on this season on Everest. And it's a bigger story that suggests a larger problem within mountaineering and climbing, and I certainly believe that to be true, that there is a problem within this world of potentially sexual predators and inappropriate sexual harassment happening on mountains and in mountain communities around the world. I don't mean to say exactly that perhaps our community is especially bad. Unfortunately, I think this is an issue that exists everywhere in our society, especially in places where kind of like power imbalances exist and where huge egos are often celebrated. Um, so, almost at the same time, I think came out the news that Charlie Barrett, sort of well-known climber in California, and it spent a lot of time in Yosemite and on the East Side and was certainly part of the climbing group that I spend time in here at home. He was sentenced to life in prison for sexual assault. And in some ways, a lot of similarities to what we're hearing now from the Himalaya, multiple cases, multiple victims over years, a general knowledge within the climbing community that he was perhaps a bad dude and doing bad things, but it took years and years and years for the legal system to actually put him behind bars. And the NIMS case right now, they're allegations against NIMS. They're credible allegations. Certainly, the New York Times extensively, to my understanding, researched over a period of many, many months before publishing. And I think one of the reasons they published and one of the reasons I chose to repost and support the story and try to give it a wider audience, like many other climbers ultimately decided to do. I think it's because we know internally as a community that there are a lot more stories there, and perhaps quite a few more victims that weren't willing to put their names out there based on fear of reprisals. And so I think my hope with sharing the story is that more women feel comfortable sharing their stories, because they have a right to have their stories heard and to have, justice through the situation if possible. I have no idea what that looks like. I know nothing about the legal sides of if these allegations are true and they happened in Nepal or in Pakistan and other legal ways that the victims can have justice. I really don't know. What I do know is we have to support these stories being told. And I think it's important as well. Like I have no firsthand knowledge of any inappropriate incident with NIMS. And I think that's really important. I can't speak to any facts in the case. But in the bigger picture way, I think for a few years now, since I met NIMS in 2019 on K2, I've struggled with the fact that his style of climbing and leadership seemed to encourage a lack of humility to the mountains, to the need for a team, and for the need of honesty around failure, how often we all fail in the mountains, how often the mountain kind of wins and we need to back away. And, I think my challenge with NIMS from the beginning was just this just massive ego that nothing he could do or say was wrong. And does that necessarily lead to sexual assault or these other terrible things? Of course not. But I've felt a discomfort in his style of leadership and approach to the mountains for a long time now. And bottom line, I just hope the stories that need to be told get out, that women feel supported in this instance and throughout the mountaineering and climbing world, that we as a community just have no tolerance for this bullshit. Like, it is wrong and it destroys lives. And if it's happening, you deserve to be caught and prosecuted.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you said it well, and it takes a lot of courage for the women to come forward and tell their stories. It takes a lot of courage for the two women journalists to research this and pursue this story. And commend everyone for coming forward and telling this story.
I think it is funny. I guess I was one of the early ones to post on Instagram like this story deserves to be read and thought about and posted about. And I got hundreds of comments thanking me for my courage as a white dude who owns a guide company. And it just felt really like, of course, I appreciate the support, but it felt really unnecessary and almost inappropriate. Like, to what you said, the courage of the two women who chose to be named in the article and to put themselves out there, that are now just being blasted by like Nims's true followers and by his legal team and PR team. And like, it does take remarkable courage to be the first one or the first two to do that. And it shouldn't take as much courage as it does, but it it makes sense to me, like why someone would be afraid. Like, these stories have been percolating around the climbing community for 5 years now, and it took one or two women, and it took the journalists who are willing to say, that's it, we're going to vet these stories, we're going to put them out there no matter how hard it is or how much it hurts or how much personal risk we take, because it has to stop. And so yeah, just please do go read the New York Times article, and kudos to the team who actually put themselves out there. And it wasn't me or any of the other guide service operators that took a risk. It was that original team, and hopefully more people who are willing to, if they have stories, come forward. And you know, we it's easy to say like maybe climbing's having its Me Too moment or whatever it is, but like I do think that's important too. Like, if these allegations are true about NIMS, they need to be prosecuted and thoroughly vetted. At the same time, I obviously there's not only one sexual predator in the mountaineering community, and if this is our time, then let's fucking go. Let's like clean our laundry and clean our house and like be in a place where we can be proud of what we do and how we do it.
Well, and as we talked about earlier, it's not just the mountaineering world. You know, mountaineering and climbing is, as you say, having its moment right now. There's a New York Times article pointing to our sport and our activity, but we know that it happens in a lot of male-dominated, ego-driven, power-hungry environments out there, and it doesn't have to stop at mountaineering. We don't have to just clean the laundry of mountaineering and climbing. It can, hopefully be a little bit of a catalyst for more change across the world and across these male driven, power hungry, high ego environments that are, countless throughout our society.
Yep, absolutely right.
All right. Well, it is a great article, well written. I would encourage everyone to take a read and think about ways that, we can make change in our world. Other brief news I do want to mention as well, a first ski descent of the last 8,000 meter peak out there. That
Yeah,
was
this
one on your
one's
list, I know.
this one's exciting and a little interesting because it is like, oh, shoot, what am I doing in 2025? I had this obviously there were 14 mountains above 8,000 meters or 26,000 feet, and all of them had seen ski descent uh, or ski or snowboard descent, with the exception of the third tallest mountain in the world called Kanchenjunga. A number of skiers had tried it over the years. There have been a number of fatalities, including one last year of a skier trying to make the descent. And this year, a Polish skier named Bartek, along with his cameraman partner, kind of went on a tear in the Himalaya, which culminated in no oxygen first ski descent of Kanchenjunga just 10 days ago. And while it's a tiny bit bittersweet for me in terms of just like big dreams, like I am so excited for them, and just can't wait to see more of the footage. And the wild thing is that a week before they made this first ski descent of Kanchenjunga, they also made the second ski descent of Makalu, the peak I was lucky enough to make the first ski descent of 2 years ago. And this second descent that they did, they made without supplemental oxygen as well. And this is something I've talked about on this podcast before, but I believe the bar is changing ever since K2 was skied without supplemental oxygen by Andrej in 2000, let's see, I'm going to say 18. It was the first of the major 8,000 meter peaks to be skied without oxygen. And I knew then, like, wow, this younger generation is doing something in better style than the old guys have been doing, including me on these different mountains. And I was kind of waiting to see like where that went. And now Bartek skiing both the third and fifth tallest mountains in the world back to back without oxygen. It's like, yep, it's done. And for a long time, I've been saying like there is no point in professional climbers climbing 8,000 meter peaks with supplemental oxygen. Like it just not a thing, and it shouldn't be a thing. And it's one of my kind of like personal soapbox things about the NIMS records and the Kristen Harila records, and a lot of the kind of people chasing now doing all 14 8,000 meter peaks faster and faster, or the first person from different countries. Like climbing 8,000 meter peaks as a professional athlete, like it never used to matter if you did one with supplemental oxygen. And like I'm just going to keep rambling here. You stop me if you want, but like I love my climbs that I've done with supplemental oxygen. I think my clients should be so incredibly proud of the summits they've done, including like 4 days ago on Mount Everest. All my clients wore supplemental oxygen and they fought for their lives, and they were wildly important experiences that should be deeply valued. But if you're a professional athlete, just like if you're in the Tour de France, you shouldn't be doping, and oxygen is doping. And so that was my standard for climbing 8,000 meter peaks for decades in terms as a professional instead of as a recreational climber. Um, but skiing, I used to make like a little exception to, because a lot of us just thought it wasn't possible to ski at a high level in super exposed terrain without being on supplemental oxygen. You know, Lhotse was skied on oxygen. I skied Makalu on oxygen. Back in the day, Jimmy and Kit and all those climbers on Everest skied on Everest with oxygen. And now the young kids, they've proven like that is not necessary. And so all of a sudden, I'm like, if you're a professional skier skiing on an 8,000 meter peak, trying to do a first or claim a route or a line, the game has changed. It needs to be without supplemental oxygen. So, all that to say, kudos to these guys. And I just hope their story is well told by their sponsors. Like Bartek doesn't even have Instagram. He's just this Polish phenom, one of many coming out of Poland that are ski mountaineering at a high level. And God, I just can't wait to see what they did.
Well, he's erasing the asterisks. It is cool. I think you look at, the development of sport and, early on climbing in Yosemite or, alpine climbing in Europe, like things were done differently. And then as, technology advances and people are pushing those limits, those asterisks get erased, and, it becomes like you can't just do it one way. You have to do it with better style or more pure, or, I think it's cool. It opens up. It's not just about a first ascent on a mountain anymore. It's about which line can you ski, or how can you do it, how many can you do, all those different kind of ways to change the game a little bit. So it is quite exciting to see, the world of 8,000 meter ski mountaineering, quite niche, being pushed to not just getting first descents, but, without oxygen or new lines, new routes, etc.
Yeah, and so I just love, like, it's easy for people, the armchair mountaineers, to sit around and be like, oh, all the firsts have been done. It's all bullshit. Like, it's not like it used to be. And what I see specifically in ski mountaineering is like, we are just coming into a golden age. Like when I started trying to ski 8,000 meter peaks, I think my first attempt was in 2011 when I skied Manaslu from the True Summit and made the first ascent there. Like, of course, there had been people skiing peaks before that, but no one really talked about it. It was considered kind of like this foolish thing because the skiing's so bad and the conditions are bad. And except and there's all these asterisks to it, like you mentioned, and caveats, like you used a rope here and things like that. Like it didn't really feel like a thing then, and I just loved it so much. I just kept trying to do it in Ski Choyu in 2013 and tried Makalu in 2012 and 2015 and went to Everest and tried to ski Everest and tried to ski Lhotse and make an early ski descent unsuccessful of Lhotse. Like I was completely obsessed and no one really cared, and that's cool. It was for me, not for anyone else. But also, there was no one else out there really with skis. And now, all of a sudden, like this season, there were skiers on every single 8,000-meter peak, including we had two skiers on our Alpenglow team on the north side of Everest. And yeah, there were skiers on every mountain and with the right gear and the right passion, and not just like doing it to make a few turns while acclimatizing, but dreaming of skiing the biggest mountains in the world. Nick Russell's out there pushing. All these Chamonix skiers are out there pushing. Of course, Jim Morrison is still like holding the torch for like huge, massive ideas on big mountains. I think there is so much to come in terms of not only better style, more skiers, but bigger lines and skied in faster, more fluid ways. That, I think the next decade of skiing on the big mountains is going to be really, really fun to watch.
Well, I've got many questions, but I think we should probably save it for an episode about ski mountaineering at 8,000 meters. Maybe we'll bring Jim on or bring someone like Nick Russell on and dive into that more, because it's cool to see a sport that, 8,000-meter climbing has been around for a while, and this kind of new style or new tactic is kind of coming into its moment. So fun to see.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll stay tuned and we'll get a little bit of an Everest debrief from you shortly.
Cool. Today's podcast is brought to you by Alpenglow Expeditions, a Tahoe-based guide company with an international reputation. In its 20th year of operations, Alpenglow leads the highest quality expeditions in some of the world's greatest mountain ranges, from California's High Sierra to the rugged Himalaya. Alpenglow runs more than 40 international expeditions per year, as well as offering a full menu of guided ski and climbing courses throughout California. Join us and experience the Alpenglow difference.
All right. Welcome back. Episode 5. We're going to dive in with Adrian on a little Everest recap. Adrian, you got home 36 hours ago.
Sounds about right.
How's the jet lag?
I don't know what's up and down. Jet lag is a thing, right? I always find it harder to come home than to go out. I don't know whether that's an east-west thing or just being more used to like my rhythms at home, which are then all whacked. But Ambien, better living through chemistry. Ambien helps. And I mean, being
6,000 feet above sea level helps as well.
Yeah, I don't think I've taken a breath in like 5 minutes. I get home, I try to do exercise. I played tennis yesterday, believe it or not. So I try to exercise, try to get tired, try to force myself into the new schedule. I'm not a napper or anything like that. And being together with my son, with Arrow and Emily, there's just so much joy for me coming home that it's easy to battle through kind of like the discomfort of jet lag. Home is awesome. I just can't believe how good it is here. It also just happens that we came home in a heat wave, quote unquote, but heat waves in Tahoe are kind of awesome things. It's like 80 degrees and totally perfect. And all I want to do is jump in the lake. So home is great.
Awesome. Well, welcome home. We do want to kind of, while it's still fresh, recap Everest with you. I'd love to hear, your perspective on the season as a whole, both on the north side and the south side, as well as some of your experiences specifically with the Alpenglow team. You had full team success on the north side of the mountain, and it was a spectacular season from what we heard. Just, limited number of teams, super quiet, really like an authentic mountain experience that you probably haven't ever experienced, more akin to what it was like pre-2000s, pre-massive commercialization of the mountain. But let's start first on the south side. It
Sure.
was
Let's talk some shit first, and then we'll talk about how
yeah.
awesome we are. I love it.
We got to set the stage a little bit. There were, many summits of clients and, non-guided climbers on the south side. There were 8 fatalities on the south side of the mountain this year. It was I want to say it was a reasonably drama-free season as far as the mountain goes. But I think, in my mind, there was no major, multi-casualty accident. There wasn't like a massive event that really shook the world. It seemed like there were a lot of little to medium sized things that probably added up to a significant season. But there was no 2014, 2015 style massive event that really bookmarked that season as a notable one. What are some of the things that you noted from Southside News?
Yeah, so of course I wasn't there. Everyone knows that very well. So secondhand information, like so many people. I think two great places for getting news through the season in real time and afterwards and sort of recaps. I just love to shout out Alan on Net, who's kind of like the premier blogger from Everest and has been for decades, raising money for Alzheimer's research. He has a great summary of the season up yesterday. And then Explorers Web, this site that we all used to hate back in the 90s and early 2000s, and it was really sensational and not a great place for actual news. Thanks to the hard work of Angela Benavides as a journalist and others, it's now a pretty good resource for what actually is going on over there. So two places to take a look if you want to hear more stories from the south side and the north side. For me, I think your description is right. The big thing is it is a season that won't look like the highest death tally or something like that because there was no single big accident. So last year, I think 17 or 18 were killed, and it was like the year Everest broke. This year, only 8 killed only. But to me, looking at it, there's some really notable things that I think are showing the trends that kind of point to the issues of the south side, the reason I don't climb there anymore. And even people like on net are like, maybe finally people are seeing why things cannot go on as they have been on the south side. So for instance, there were no icefall deaths this year, but how that happened is pure luck. And I think that's very important to remember. In the same way that last year, when 4 people died in the icefall in one accident, it was pure bad luck, right? But on averages, there are going to be multiple deaths in the icefall. The icefall this year, instead of taking Sherpa like 2 to 3 hours to get through, was taking them 6 hours, and members were taking up to 12 hours to get through the icefall because the route was so convoluted and broken. Now, whether you blame that on climate change or a low snow winter or bad luck in route finding, putting more people for more hours in the icefall will lead to more accidents. And the fact that the accident didn't happen this year doesn't mean that people weren't just like unbelievably scared and frustrated at the number of hours they were having to spend in the icefall. It also took 12 days longer than normal to put that route in through the icefall, which then led to the bigger issue that we did see, which was overcrowding later in the season. If you lose 2 weeks at the beginning of the season due to a complicated icefall, well, then there are that many fewer days for all the carrying that the Sherpa have to do of oxygen and equipment, and then all the actual climbing and acclimatizing that the members need to do. So interestingly, this year wasn't a record year in terms of permits. There were far fewer permits on the south side this year than last year. It's almost like that last year, 18 dead tipping point. People did listen, people didn't come, and that's a good thing. But because of the compressed season, we still saw some of the biggest lines and traffic jams we've ever seen on the mountain. The other big thing that I think people finally are noticing is because of the increasing inexperience of climbers on the south side being brought by budget companies, instead of requiring 6,000 meter peaks and 7,000 meter peaks and 8,000 meter peaks before going to Everest, people are showing up with almost no experience. That means they need more support from local climbers, Sherpa, high altitude workers. So this season, I think I read there were a little less than 200 summits of foreign climbers and over 600 summits of local climbers. So, three times as many workers, high altitude workers, as members. And to me, that's really problematic. That's why we're seeing this. Some of this huge crowding is actually all the support staff that's needed for the really inexperienced climbers. So these problems continue. The most visible accident that happened because of that overcrowding was when a cornice, which is an overhanging snowbank that forms on a ridge of a mountain from wind, a cornice that might have had, we hear, over 50 people standing on it, broke, and loads of people fell off basically the backside of the mountain onto a vertical face called the cantering face. The ones who were clipped into the rope lived and they were able to be rescued and hauled back up. Unfortunately, two climbers were not clipped to the rope when the cornice broke and were lost. They're gone. They were killed somewhere down the cantering face. And so, all of that, that's a very visible example that caught the mainstream media's attention, but it's just one of many examples of where too many people with too little experience were all put in the same place. And those are the situations we're creating on the South Side, where if and when the bad thing happens, the cornice breaks, or the storm comes, or there's an oxygen regulator failure, things like that. Once those things happen in those situations, they can turn into mass casualty events. And the South Side is just setting itself up for a true mass casualty event. And I hope that this year is another step towards recognizing that we need sensible regulations on the mountain um, to potentially prevent that mass casualty event.
Well, and hopefully, more and more people that have aspirations of climbing Everest might just recognize that there are choices in your decision. And certainly the North Side comes with its own challenges, which we'll dive into in a minute here. But you don't have to climb on the south side of the mountain. That is completely up to the climber's, decision which side they choose and which company they choose to go with. So it is interesting, obviously, regulation and the Nepalese government getting involved a little bit more would change things, but it is truly up to the climber and whether or not you want to, add that risk of being involved in something that is a little bit in your control by just climbing on the other side of the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think obviously this is a hobby horse that I'll beat or ride on often, but there are so many examples of this around the world where a route ultimately becomes impractical to continue climbing, even though it was the historic route or the traditionally easiest way up the mountain, whether it's the normal route on Huascaran that's no longer guided by ethical companies in Peru, or it's the route selection changing through each season on Mont Blanc as the season progresses. What is a safe route up Mont Blanc changes because of rockfall and things like that. And we as mountain professionals need to be making those decisions. And while in developed world countries, often governments come in and are part of that decision making, it should and can start with the expedition operators. And so I guess that kind of ties into like what I think about, like when we were talking earlier today about humility and a lack of ego in a leadership of a company or in a leadership position on a big mountain like Everest. Like, people should be looking for companies who understand the risks, who have a lot of experience managing those risks, and who aren't afraid to walk away from profit and or success to keep their clients and, equally importantly, their mountain workers alive. And I think when you look in the industry, you can see companies that have done that time and time again, whether it's Himalayan Experience, Russell Bryce, who's no longer in the industry, or Adventure Consultants, Guy Cotter. Of course, I'd love to believe Alpenglow is in that category, but it's like we don't put profit or success first. It's about humility around the mountains and knowing they can get us killed. And we've all lost enough people in the mountains to know that coming home is more important whenever humanly possible.
And certainly those companies do exist on the south side. We're not here to say that can't happen on the south side. But I do think it's important to look into the company a bit more and like you said, think about what's most important. And in the mountains, we believe in round trips, not just summits.
Hell yeah.
Awesome. So let's move over to the north side. It wasn't an easy season for you. You don't actually look terribly tired, but I can tell you're pretty tired. You're happy to be home. The season started off with some challenges just accessing the north side of the mountain. The Chinese government delayed your entry to May 7th, which it ended up working out, but it was a little bit borderline for a bit, I'm sure, whether that was going to be, give you enough time to lead the expedition as you like. And then once you got there, certainly there were still some challenges. Talk a little bit about your time on the north side of the mountain. You guys had a fast trip. You got there pretty quickly and moved up the mountain quite fast. But you had full team success. We had teams. You had teams both going to the North Pole and going to the summit, and I believe everyone succeeded. Tell us a little bit about your time over there on the north side of the mountain.
Yeah. So, as listeners to this podcast know, there are two sides to Mount Everest, two commonly climbed routes for non-professional mountaineers. One is the south side from Nepal, and one is the north side from Tibet, China. We've been on the north side of the mountain since 2015, but the north side of the mountain was closed for the past 5 years due to COVID. So the last time Alpenglow or I was on the north side was in 2019. And I've been patiently waiting to get back. So have many of Alpenglow's clients. And this year it finally happened. With Tibet opened this past fall for Cho-Yu climbs and Shishapangma climbs. So we were confident it would open this spring. But we also kind of knew there might be new regulations or new limitations. We never expected that they wouldn't open the border until May 7th. So, a lot of people, when they talk about why not climb on the north side, basically the idea that the Chinese are not a great partner for business is the reason often given. And it's true. I don't want to sugarcoat in any way, like, how deep our uncertainty was of whether we could run a successful trip on the north side and how difficult that is financially for the company and kind of emotionally for all of our clients and guides. And so, a normal season on Everest, the Tibet would open, let's say, around April 8th. Our Sherpa would go in, our clients would join 10 days later, around April 20th. And then the ropes would go to the summit of the mountain, let's say the first week of May. And then everyone would be summited and done by the, let's say, 25th of May, something like that. And this year, first of all, Tibet just didn't tell us when they'd open for a long time. So we planned our trip as normal and then just kind of like crossed our fingers and prayed. And then when they finally did announce to us the opening date, like you said, it was May 7th. Now, I've summited the mountain 9 times. More than half of my summits were before May 7th. So, we weren't even going to be in the country at the time that I'm usually summiting the mountain. And Everest, you can't summit any time because the jet stream, the winds, basically 150 plus mile per hour winds, hit the summit of the mountain 340 days a year, and then 20 days a year, mostly in the spring, a couple in the fall. The winds, the jet stream moves north and essentially gives you a window to stand on top. It's a tiny little window, and you never know where it's going to come, somewhere between, let's say, May 5th and June 5th. So this was like a nearly impossible hurdle that we started with. Now, I think there were probably meant to be a dozen teams on the north side. 9 of those 12 teams chose to go back to the south side and take on the risks of the south side versus try a late season. We, along with Furtenbach Expeditions and a small Nepali company called Climalaya, decided to hold the course and still go to Tibet. And the reason I had a lot of confidence is one, I actually know that on the north side, the season can go much later than the south side because of the way the storms come from the south and we don't have an ice fall to go through. I was confident we could climb into June. And then the the second big reason was that Alpenglow Expeditions does something called rapid ascent, which is a whole nother podcast, but essentially we pre-acclimatize people to about 20,000 feet using hypoxic tents at home. And then we have, I would say, impeccable logistics that lead to fewer mistakes that allow us to compress the time of a trip from a traditional 70-day trip to a 30. Ooh, cat's excited about Hypoxico. Uh, Hypoxico rapid ascent essentially shrinks a trip length from about 70 days to about 35 days. So we did feel like we could work with this time limitation, but it was crazy. We stayed at home. Some people went to Ecuador, tried to stay entertained until May 7th. And then we got into the country May 7th. Our Sherpa also did not get into the country until May 7th. And what that meant is instead of the Sherpa working 1 to 2 weeks on the mountain before we arrived to establish base camp, advanced base camp, some of the, begin doing carries on the mountain, we were all doing it together. So when we finally got into base camp on May 12th, I think was the first day we were allowed to walk into base camp, it was go time. And we had to, while we knew we might be able to climb into June, I didn't want to count on the fact that there would be a jet stream window in June. So we were kind of shooting to capture whatever window we could. And what that meant for our clients and for our guides and for our Sherpa was just like every day counted. Well, normally we do 2 or 3 days of work, then we'd rest and hang out and eat for a couple of days, then we do a couple of days of work. In this case, there were no days off. And that led to certainly some challenges on the mountain, with the big ones being that people's bodies were remarkably beaten down through the lack of rest that happened in the first 2 weeks of the trip.
Well, I think taking a quick step back, another reason that it was actually feasible for you guys is the mountain was closed to foreign climbers, but there was a Chinese team on the mountain, and they were able to fix ropes. So part of that work was already taken care of. I can't imagine if you guys had gotten into base camp on May 12th that the Sherpa would have had time to fix the mountain, for your summit window as it stood.
Yeah, I mean, one of the unique things on the north side is, that China has been climbing on the mountain throughout these years that we've been away or not allowed into Tibet. And they've been having successful summits every season, learning more about how to operate on the mountain each year. So the level of professionalism in terms of rope fixing and kind of government management was really high. And it made a huge difference that the rope was fixed. It also meant the Chinese team, as we were arriving, they went for their summit push. And so we truly did have the mountain to ourselves for the second half of our trip, including our summit, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the mountain was completely empty. We were the only team on the entire north side of the mountain when we summited on the 28th and 29th of May. But yeah, that work was hugely important. Now, back in the day, my team used to do all or most of the rope fixing on the south side of the mountain. And it was one of my favorite parts of the expedition. So I'll push back. I think we totally could have fixed the route, and maybe it would have been some of the greatest days of our lives. The years I went with the rope fixing team to the summit in 2010 and 2011 on the south side were my most memorable summits of Everest. And if the opportunity ever presented itself again, I would be in. But in this case, it was one thing off the table. We were able to focus on carrying oxygen up, on establishing our mountain camps, on acclimatization rotations, and not rope fixing. But with that said, our Sherpa team, I'm always worried about the health of everyone on my team, and usually it's clients and guides who get sick. This year, the largest group of people getting sick and being physically challenged were our Sherpa team. And it was due to something that I kind of didn't see coming because of the delay in entering Tibet, all of my Sherpa climbers had left their village, Forte, which sits at about 14,000 feet in the Khumbu Valley under Mount Everest. And they had all come to Kathmandu at essentially sea level to turn in their passports and wait for their visas, expecting it to take 3 days. Instead, it took over 3 weeks, but they couldn't fly back to their village without their passports. And so they all sat at sea level for 3 weeks, not training, not working out, probably drinking too much and eating too much. And so then when my Sherpa team arrived in Tibet, they were not physically prepared for the workload. And we actually had one Sherpa get mild HAPE or pulmonary edema, a number with acute mountain sickness, a number with upper respiratory like coughs, bronchitises. And so a big part of our expedition doctor and my kind of like expedition leader roles were actually like slowing our Sherpa team down and getting them back to health before we went high on the mountain. And that's just not something that culturally is in their brain. They think they needed to work through those sicknesses and keep pushing. And their tendency is like to make fun of the ones that are weak and sick. And it was something we had to be really careful of. Like it could have turned into a real emergency situation. So that was a unique learning and moment of our trip. And I think it was hard on some of the clients too. They're like, we feel good. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And it was like, no, we need to not go anywhere right now and recover as a team.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, to think about, Alpenglow's delay meant that clients and guides were continuing to acclimatize. Some got to go down to Ecuador and climb, at high elevations. Others spent more time in hypoxico tents while the Sherpa were declimatizing.
Yeah, exactly.
and and experiencing something that they've witnessed for years, watching, Western climbers come in and have headaches, have issues with, upper respiratory issues. And I'm sure they're very familiar with these symptoms, but since they'd never felt them, it must have been wild to like see how their bodies responded and realize they're human too.
Yeah, it was a great reminder. I mean, our Sherpa team have over 110 summits of Everest amongst the 14 of them. Like, it's just incredible the amount of experience. And yet, it was a good reminder that, like, altitude sickness, it doesn't care. There is a process. And if you skip the process, you get fucked. And we had to be, I've been using this word a lot, this podcast, but like we had to be really humble in the face of that. And it didn't matter the experience or talent. We had to be patient.
Yeah. So you guys, got camp set. You guys moved up the mountain. You did some acclimatization on the mountain. It sounds like that all went pretty well. And then you moved into your summit push. That continued to highlight the speed of the expedition and the fatigue that was wearing on the whole group.
Yeah, that's right. So normally on normal expedition, even though it's a rapid ascent expedition, we usually go up, do an acclimatization rotation, and either tag or sleep at 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet. So all the clients have to at least tag that. Many sleep there. That's kind of their test. If they can do that without supplemental oxygen, then we feel comfortable with them attempting a summit push on supplemental oxygen. And so everyone did that tag. We came back down to advanced base camp at 21,000 feet. And then normally what we do is we walk 12 miles down the valley back to base camp where we have incredible food and fantastic espresso machine and barista and a bakery and that we set up and all these things, electric blankets on our beds. We can really be comfortable and recover and eat well and drink well at 17,000 feet. But this year we arrived in advanced base camp at 21,000 feet after that acclimatization rotation. And guessing the weather forecast is always a bit of a game. It takes experience. It takes these models. It takes these fantastic meteorologists that we hire from Switzerland, and you put the puzzle together and come up with a plan. And when we got to advanced base camp and we're looking for a window, we just didn't see a window we felt confident about in the long-term forecast into early June. We saw a decent window coming at the end of May, and then a lot of uncertainty with storms, cyclones starting to come in off the Bay of Bengal in the beginning of the monsoon. So we like argued about it and debated it, but got about it and ultimately decided not to drop back to base camp to have our recovery week. That also meant that we were not going to give the Sherpa high altitude worker climbing team another week to finish doing carries to the upper mountain camps of oxygen and food and epigas and all the things we needed to survive. We decided that we had to make a push for this late May window, or risk having no window at all. So once again, the trip was compressed on the front end, and then the trip was really compressed on the back end. And we decided to have just 3 days of rest in advanced base camp and then go for our summit. And our Sherpa team and our Sherpa leader, Dorje Sonam Sherpa, one of my really good friends, we sat and we debated it, and he was absolutely confident that the Sherpa could get the necessary work done to make a go of it. And he agreed with kind of the analysis of the weather that the guide team had made. And so we decided to push. What that meant was, once again, on our summit push, everything was really tight. It needed to be perfect. The Sherpa needed to have exactly what we needed in each camp, and there wasn't a lot of extra. And then the guides needed to really manage the client team to be healthy and fit and not make mistakes and not forget things, and to really climb pretty independently from the Sherpa team. And that's something that I at Alpenglow kind of love. Like, our Sherpa not cooking for us and making water and carrying all wipes and food and whatever else we need. Like, we are competent teammates to the Sherpa. We carry all our own equipment. We help set up tents. We cook in mountain camps. And then we all climb together, and it's a lot of fun. And it's kind of the model I like. But this time it was not only the model I like, it was the model we needed to catch this window. And everyone excelled and crushed, but it definitely felt like we were on the edge throughout. We ended up having a lot of wind, moving from Camp 2 at about 25,000 feet to Camp 3 at 27,000 feet. By a lot of wind, I mean, 60 mile an hour gusts and consistent 30 to 40 mile an hour winds. Now, that's not wind we could survive on the summit. That would not work. But moving between camps lower on the mountain, we felt comfortable doing it. But it was like hard. Communication is tough in that much wind. You're spending a lot of energy getting pushed around. So like getting to the highest camp was a real test for our clients and guides. And that was exciting. And I'd say definitely focused everyone's energy on wow, is it going to be like this at night? Does Adrian think we can climb this at night? And the key was, it was like, no, this wind is not going to be there tonight. And then you can imagine me sitting in my tent from about 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. just
resting.
Waiting, it's not going to be like this at 10 p.m. It's not going to be like this at 10 p.m. And as it turned out, exactly like the forecast, the wind progressively dropped starting at about 8 p.m. By 10 p.m., it was a beautiful night. And we had kind of a 12-hour window of fantastic conditions to go. And like you said, get every single member on top and every single climbing Sherpa, 12 Sherpa, 6 members, 5 mountain guides, all on top. Oh, actually over 2 perfect nights, the 28th and 29th.
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, it sounds like you took, I guess I should say, since 2020, you took a lot of risks, with regard to, bringing clients onto these teams and making sure that everything was going to go smoothly. And you put yourself out there quite a bit. And I'm sure the relief when it all panned out, and not risk in the sense of life or death risk, but reputation and just you put yourself out there and you have obviously the experience to back it, but some things could have played either way and they ended up playing in your favor. And I'm sure the relief and the satisfaction of this summit is up there with some of your more memorable ones as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The kind of reputational risk of a company or an expedition leader, it shouldn't maybe be this way. And we all should recognize that there's a big chunk of luck involved. But when an expedition leader chooses a summit day, they are choosing the weather window. And there is no such thing as a perfect weather window on Everest. Like we are all playing games with models to try to get the best day without having complete information. It's one of the challenges of Everest that I love so much is we never have complete information and we need to make decisions anyway and stand behind them and be ready to adjust when we get those decisions wrong. And but if you choose, which happens, if you choose a summit day where no one can summit because the wind's too high and you put all your eggs in that basket and you've spent your hundreds of thousands of dollars of oxygen and guiding and Sherpa and you put everyone up high and no one can go. That actually happened on the south side this year where 58 climbers left on a summit day and not a single one summited because the wind was too high. Um, that is quite tough emotionally and reputationally. And I am so glad it didn't happen to me this season. I'd love to say it's because of skill, but we know there's luck involved as well. So, yeah, when I had those moments at kind of like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. when I was holding the sides of my black diamond tent so the poles wouldn't break because the wind was so strong. And there was no way you could try to go for a summit push. And it was like, did I blow it? And how am I going to survive this? Um, and then it dropped. So yeah, there's risk involved. But that leads to that much more joy when it comes together. And I think I posted this on Instagram, but there was a moment when the sun rose and we were on the ridge at 28,500 feet and just the most epic views of all of Tibet and realizing we were actually the only climbers, not only on the north side, but the entire mountain because the icefall doctors had closed the south side for the season and removed the ladders. So we were the only team on the entire tallest mountain on the world. And I just knew we were all going to summit and it was going to be a perfect day and people were going to be able to spend half an hour to an hour on the summit taking their photos and celebrating. It might have been a little tear. It was a moment that I've waited a long, long time for. So that was really special. And then, just to not make it sound too easy, then the wind came back after we were back off the mountain at Camp 3. By the time we got to Camp 3, the tents were on the verge of being destroyed. And the team had to go from this incredible celebration and like calling their moms and taking their photos, doing whatever it is. Like Graham Cooper had a can of buffalo pickle that you wanted to take a photo with. Like we were able to be so silly and celebratory on the summit. And then 6 hours later, we were fighting for our lives. And we had a really, that's an exaggeration. And I hope it's an appropriate one. Like we were all going to be okay, but we had to work really hard to get off the mountain. And we had to work really hard, not only to get off the mountain, but like when things get serious, that's when people leave trash, right? That's when it's easier to leave a tent than it is to break a tent down in 80-mile-per-hour winds and pack it up and take it off the mountain. That's when it's easier to throw oxygen bottles off the side of the mountain instead of bringing them down. And Alpenglow was like just adamant and dedicated that we were not going to turn into a shit show just because things were hard. And so, 14 Sherpa were working at their absolute max to get every piece of trash off the mountain at the same time that the mountain guides were just intensely focused on every client getting off the mountain without frostbite. I think there's rumors there might have been up to 100 cases of frostbite on the south side of the mountain this year. And every single one of those to me is a dramatic failure of guiding and leadership. But it took every single guide's effort and every single client's effort to not be in that position. When you add 60 to 80-mile-per-hour winds to negative 30 degree or negative 20 degree temperatures at high altitude when everyone's exhausted, it's as real as it gets. And I think we still lose sight of that. Like Everest is so damn dangerous and so damn hard, even for a company like mine that's so resourced and has such low client to guide ratios. We still got the shit kicked out of us, and it took everything everyone had to get back down to North Cole Camp. We didn't even make it down to Advanced Base Camp. I haven't not made it down to Advanced Base Camp after a summit in like a decade. It's like one of my things. And this year was so hard by the time we got to 23,000 feet and there were tents there in the North Pole, we were like, we have to get inside. We have to get warm. We have to make sure there's no frostbite. We have to rehydrate our team. So we fought really hard to get off the mountain.
Yeah, in talking to some people and yourself included, it sounds like some of the guides really reached their max, in that, they were just working so hard and, focusing so much on others that they really, put it all out there and really reached their max capacity on this trip in particular. And these are not guides that are new to these experiences. They have lots of experience in the 8,000 meter world, both personal and guiding, and have quite the resume. And they, similar to the Sherpa team, were really reaching their max capacity and putting it all out there to make sure that the team had a true success, not just a summit success, but a true round trip success.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, our guide team, Dave Morton, Sid Patterson, Carla Perez, Chad Peel, me, like dozens of Everest summits amongst us, including no oxygen climbs. I was so honored to work with the whole team. But yeah, the reality was, thanks to the wind, it started to make logistics communication really, really difficult on our team. We couldn't communicate between Sherpa and guides where some of our essential supplies were. So when we got to Camp 2 on the way down, the place where we change oxygen bottles and things like that and have oxygen for the rest of our descent, Camp 2 was largely on the verge of being destroyed by these winds. And so the Sherpa had been forced to drop some of the tents before we arrived there. So instead of being able to crawl into a tent, recover a little bit, have some water, change our oxygen bottles, we were now sitting on a ridge at 25,000 feet in 80-mile-an-hour winds, trying to make those same adjustments. And in that process, a couple of the guides had to do things like, it actually made more sense, instead of trying to find more oxygen bottles, to descend as guides without supplemental oxygen. So while our clients all had supplemental oxygen, of course, a couple of guides made a decision, instead of finding more bottles, to go down without supplemental oxygen. And of course, we're all capable of that. That's one of my expectations of my mountain guides, is they're going to be strong enough and talented enough and experienced enough to be able to handle something like running out of oxygen. But when you're carrying a 60-pound pack of trash and empty oxygen bottles, and you're supporting your client, making sure they make good decisions, rappelling, setting up devices correctly, staying warm, keeping gloves on, and then you allow yourself to run out of oxygen when you're not really truly acclimatized for no oxygen climb, it puts you in a pretty special place. And you've heard my soapbox before, Sam. Like, I don't believe mountain guiding can be done without supplemental oxygen. So this was not that. This was not like egotistical guides showing off that they can do the work without supplemental oxygen. It was truly just a calculation of like, well, let's say it's going to take another 30 minutes in the wind to find a bottle, versus that's 30 minutes we can get lower on the mountain where there is less wind, choosing to do that. And so the choices were certainly correct choices, but it meant that a couple of the guys, by the time they reached North Col, looked pretty tired and really excited to get back on a bottle of oxygen.
Yeah, well, sounds like a wild experience, a great, great summit. Nice to get the whole team up and down safely. Certainly with some excitement just to throw in there at the end. And congratulations. It's 9 summits for you of Mount Everest. Quite the accomplishment. Look forward to hearing about your 10th.
It's a few. Well, I'll look forward to the 10th too, but it's always a good reminder. Like, obviously I'm really proud of my 9th summit, and it's probably, shoot, it's hard to say what the most memorable summit of my life is, but this one, like 5 years of kind of work and waiting and kind of putting Alpenglow's business on the line from a financial perspective to finally get this season off the ground, it feels really, really special. And like I said, that summit ridge when the sun came out, like there are a few times in my life that I've had that feeling of just utter joy and euphoria and appreciation for where I was and who I was there with. And and I felt it across my team, from like a Dave Morton who's first guided Everest in 2004 and now he was back, to Carla with all her no oxygen ascents, but like feeling it again, the specialness, to like Dorje Sonam Sherpa. It was his 20th summit when he summited with us a couple of days ago, and like his tears to be able to be back there and doing this work and doing it well was so powerful. To like the clients, we should do a whole podcast sometime on the client, on Alpenglow's clients. But one I wanted to shout out is John Colony. Like, John has actually attempted Everest 3 times before with me, so this was his 4th attempt to summit Everest, and the 3 previous times were all seasons that were canceled for reasons not under his own control. In 2012, when Russ felt like the whole mountain was too dangerous. In 2014, during the earthquake. In 2015, during the ice fall avalanche that killed 19 Sherpa. And then he took a decade off to focus on other things with his family, and then came back this year. So imagine 4 tries on the mountain, 3 failures having nothing to do with his own ability, but just the universe, the cosmos saying Everest is fucking hard and you can't summit this year. I got to stand on top with him, and it was like just this incredible feeling of like, this is why I've dedicated my career and my life to this, is someone like John Colony, like putting that level of effort in over 15 years and accomplishing his goal. It's like, that's why we climb Everest.
Certainly no cakewalk. I texted with your client, Graham, and he said it was really, really hard. And Graham is quite the athlete. So to hear that, it kind of speaks to, the accomplishment that it really is. So congratulations to everyone. I know you're excited to be home, spend some time with Emily and Arrow, and I'll let you get back to it. I won't take up any more of your time, but congratulations on number 9.
Thanks so much, Sam. Yeah, it's really good to be home.
Thanks for listening to episode 5 of the Duffel Shuffle. It's great to have a fresh recap of the Everest season right as Adrian returned home. With his return, we hope to have episodes back on our regular bi-weekly schedule, with episode 6 launching on June 18th. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, rate us, and leave us a review. It's incredibly helpful in getting our show out there.